Everyone's talking about it today. We have this budget for the next financial year, 979 billion rand, an increase in spending from most departments and a big focus on job creation. Joining me now is the Minister of Finance, Pravin Gordhan. Minister Gordhan, thanks very much for joining us today. Has there been a shift in spending priorities with the introduction of the new growth path?
The priority started with the manifesto of this administration, which said that we're prioritizing health, education, crime, rural development and job creation. And the growth part gives expression in particular to the job creation part of what we're talking about. So education, for example, is still the recipient of the biggest amount of money in all of the allocations that we actually make. The second priority clearly is the whole area of jobs creation. But there's a very important link between the two as well, because the more skilled people we can produce in the economy, the better quality of jobs we can produce and the better capacity we create for people to be absorbed as well. So yes, I think this budget in particular begins a significant shift. As we announced, we took in the end a cut of 0.3% across all departments and said that money is going for training purposes. And much of that training through the FET colleges is linked to how young people are given the capacity to get jobs as well. Next year we will take that a step further so that priority areas get a lot more focus and a lot more resources.
150 billion rands to be spent on job creation over the next 3 years, and that's included in a number of programs, including the 9 billion rand jobs fund, youth subsidy schemes as well. How do you maximize this money to ensure that it is spent efficiently and that we do create the maximum amount of jobs from that fund?
Well, a lot depends on what we do. So, I mean, 73 billion rands over 3 years goes into the expanded public works program, and those are largely job opportunities rather than jobs. So, if we can successfully combine, and remember, it's jobs and training that the 150 billion refers to. If we can successfully combine that, if we can increase the quality and quantity of jobs as well, we will do much better. So the Jobs Fund, for example, is based on the idea that both public sector agencies, public agencies and the private sector can come forward and say, here's a project we'd like you to fund, but we also prepare to put some money into this project as well. And it will give us X amount of jobs. So we will establish criteria which will say, where's the biggest bang for the buck, if you like, in respect of each of these programs. And the key is to link job creation and people who are looking for jobs with the training process as well. And so a number of institutional mechanisms either need to be put in place or improved if we're going to make that happen successfully. So I think our intent is becoming clearer. We are becoming more consensual in terms of the growth path and the necessity to create jobs. We now got the money to back some of it. The next task is to examine where our institutional strengths and weaknesses are and put them in place. And equally important is how do we get a partnership with labor and business in order that we can advance this process.
The new growth path also speaks of looser monetary policy, tighter fiscal policy. What sorts of risks do you face, though, to implementing these as we come out of the recession? We do still have a number of risks in the global financial system, not least of all the sovereign debt crisis in Europe. We have problems in North Africa at the moment. We have rising food inflation and rising fuel inflation globally. How do you manage those risks while still achieving your aims?
Well, it's a balancing act. Life is a balancing act. So at least we all agree that those are the risks. We will have to keep an eye on what our objective is on the one hand, and keep an eye on the risks on the other hand, and make adjustments where they are appropriate if the risks become a lot more real and a lot more serious. Well, the oil price is already a reality. It's sitting somewhere between 106 and 107 when I last checked. And if that goes any further, then those pose fairly serious risks for inflation and for transport costs, and will begin to have a domino effect on other things as well. So I think that combination of loose fiscal and tight monetary is a statement of the ideal. Around that, we must do what we can to achieve it, but also realize that there's no one magic bullet that will achieve that at the end of the day. That if we are going to, as the governor said in the press conference, if we're going to achieve the conditions which are required in order to enable the Reserve Bank to engage in loose monetary policy, then we need to ensure that some level of fiscal tightening happens, some level, significant level of macroeconomic reforms happen as well. so that we make our economy a lot more competitive than it actually is. So we can't instruct the Reserve Bank what to do, but we can try to create the conditions with them, and particularly outside of them, in order that we give them the space to do the right thing when the time arrives.
How about the balancing between increased spending on jobs, on social welfare, at the same time as trying to cut the current account deficit? And I think we've already seen that this year, where you had some additional expenses coming through, so the current account deficit isn't coming down as fast, sorry, the budget deficit isn't coming down as fast as you would have expected.
I think we've got a neat balance. It's not coming down as fast, but at least it's still coming down. And so our commitment to bringing the deficit down, our commitment to operating within a sustainable fiscal framework, and that's why we're proposing the idea of fiscal guidelines as we go forward, and our commitment to ensuring that our debt GDP ratio is still very nominal compared to the 226% of Japan, for example. Ours will only reach 40% in 2 or 3 years' time. So again, it's a balancing act. I think our intent is clear, that we want to create a sustainable fiscal environment, that we know there could be crises again, and just like our last surplus enabled us to handle the crisis that we've just finished, the next amount of fiscal space we create will also help us to deal with any other eventuality that arises as well, because there will always be crises. The only question is when and how serious and what kind of impact it has.
Although that debt to GDP ratio going up to 40% is still quite conservative compared to a number of other countries, it does push up those debt servicing costs,
yes,
which are going to go up substantially from 77 billion at the moment to I think 113 billion it's outlined.
Yeah.
Is that still a comfortable figure for debt servicing, and obviously money that can't be spent elsewhere in the economy?
No, that's a comfortable figure, but I think we need better output for that money. We need better value for money. And we need these balances to be very cautiously maintained. So we certainly, as government as a whole, appreciate the import of not borrowing unnecessarily, not increasing debt service costs unnecessarily, not crowding out other expenditure that we actually engage in or need to engage in as well. And we've done fairly well so far, I think, in the circumstances.
And so you spoke of creating the environment for the Reserve Bank to manage monetary policy well, and the rand obviously a big factor there. To what extent have the actions that you outlined in the medium-term budget policy statement last year been effective? Are you satisfied with the outcome that you've seen on the rand? And how do you also balance that, the rand's sudden weakness this year, 10% depreciation, with a rising inflationary environment?
I think those measures are beginning to succeed. These things take time to kick in and make their impact. But we've also had a global environment that was favorable to the depreciation of the rand as well. I think our main concern and the concern of many exporters and others is the volatility of the rand. And over time, we need to, as we have done already, create the capacity to minimize that volatility and give greater certainty. But the rand is not, the magic formula for everything either, because there too we've got to look at other ways of becoming competitive and adjusting to the global environment we find ourselves in, because by all accounts, these flows are not going to disappear tomorrow. The mixture might disappear, the length of time that they spend in a country might disappear or change, but we've got to build that into the equation. So we've got to, if you like, minimize the inflationary impact, ensure that the Reserve Bank creates the right kind of interest rate environment for businesses to continue to thrive, and from a capital account management point of view, do the right things. And at least there are a wider set of tools now. How effective they are is still open to debate. Brazil, Thailand, Korea, and others have tried all sorts of things. But the best people can say to us is that what would it have been if we didn't intervene, as opposed to this is the impact. But we're happy with where we are now. We're aware that there are risks in the environment, and we'll have to monitor those risks carefully before we take the next step.
Where are those foreign currency movements and the flows that we've seen into particularly emerging markets, one of the main focuses of that G20 meeting last weekend, and how do we create a level playing field for this two-speed economic recovery?
Well, that's part of the challenge, that as you try to sort out one set of imbalances, for example, between China and US, another set of imbalances begin to emerge as well. So I think most people within the G20 context will recognize the risks that you pointed out earlier on. Will recognize that in trying to rebalance, if you like, the original imbalances, new imbalances might actually arise as well. And there again, we require more cooperation than we have within the G20 context to achieve a wider level of stability within the global environment than we have at the moment.
Also, just on the currency, I know you don't target a level for the currency. We've talked about 10% appreciation this year. It still is pretty strong relative to where it was this time last year. Would you like to see more weakness coming through for the currency?
We've always said we want a stable and competitive rand, and I think for different industries that means different things at this point in time. Let's accept that we're heading in the right direction, and let's accept that some of the measures are beginning to have an effect, and let's also accept that we have this very uncertain global environment and potential risks that can't in fact be ignored. So let's take one step at a time. We've got from 650 to 710 or thereabouts, or within the 710, 730 range, and we can see. But if you take an average over 10 years, by the way, the rand was somewhere between 710 and 730 as well for a major part of that period. There have been swings up to 12 rands in the last couple of years, as there has been in the opposite direction to 650 as well. But it's those swings that we want to minimize to the extent we can.
Just a quick word on the BRICS. You mentioned that today in your speech as well. South Africa's been invited to join those BRICS. Do you see benefits for South Africa being aligned with countries like Brazil, Russia, India and China?
I think it's very important to be in those sorts of fora because it lends an African voice to the fora. It creates new relationships. It allows for mutually supportive activity within the G20 context, but outside of it as well, and begins to give us the possibilities of enhancing market access and trade, amongst other things, between ourselves and those countries as well. So it's a substantial step forward, and I think the message of the budget is, guys, just while we're preoccupied with our South African-centered issues, be aware that the world out there is changing. Be aware that there are opportunities arising from the changes that are happening. And can we position ourselves collectively as government, labor and business and community as well to seize those opportunities?
Yes, sir. Thank you very much for your time on a very busy day for you.